In this lesson, we're going to look at simplifying algebraic expressions, which we did look at earlier in the semester, but then it was more substituting values into the expression and simplifying. In this case, though, we're just going to simplify them and we won't be evaluating them. So we're going to look at some definitions first, and this is an example of an algebraic expression. And a term is an item that's separated by addition or subtraction. So if you look at the example above here, we have four terms. The first one is 3x. The second one is y. The third one is negative 6x. Keep the sign with the term. And the last one is 3. The coefficient is the numerical multiplier of the variable. So in the example of 3x, the coefficient is 3. In the example of y, the coefficient is 1. We never write the coefficient 1, but it's assumed when you see a variable by itself, it's 1y or 1x. The coefficient of the third one is negative 6. Okay, and the last term here does not have a coefficient because it's not a variable. The last term is actually considered a constant term. It's a quantity regarded as fixed. So 3 is our constant term. Okay? And a variable is usually represented with a letter. Often it's a Greek letter, though, and it's a quantity represented by a symbol. So in this case, it's the x and the y. When we see the term like terms, we're talking about terms that have identical variable factors. So it's really important to understand what a like term is, because you can only add and subtract terms if they are actually like each other. So the variables, all the variables have to be exactly the same, and they have to have exactly the same exponent on the variable. So if we have as our term 3x squared y, which means 3 times x squared times y. If we look at which of these terms is like it, you might want to press pause for a moment, think about it, and make your best guess as to which of those is like, and then press play again and see if your guess is correct. So if we look at negative 7x squared y, we can see that the variable part is exactly the same, so this one is a like term, or I'll put yes below. 3xy squared, although it has an x and a y, like the original one, the x would need to be squared and the y would have to be to the power of 1. So this one is not a like term. 5xy also is not a like term. And 3x squared y squared is not a like term. Only the term, doesn't matter what the coefficient is, but the variable has to be identical. Okay, so simplifying algebraic expressions. To consider it simplified, the parentheses need to be removed and like terms need to be combined. So if we look at this example of 7 times 3x squared plus 2x plus 2 times 7x squared plus 7x, we need to remove these parentheses, which are representing the fact that you're multiplying by what's in the brackets. And then if there are any like terms, they need to be combined. There's something to learn here called the distributive property. I'll just spell that out here for you. And that means that when you multiply this 7 by the items that are in parentheses, you need to make sure that that 7 is multiplied by both terms that are in that set of parentheses. And likewise, this 2 is multiplied by both of the terms that are in parentheses as well. Okay, so it's just the terms that are in the parentheses that it's next to. So in this case, we'll have 21x squared. So 7 times 3x squared gives us 21x squared plus 14x. plus 2 times 7x squared will be 14x squared plus 2 times 7x will be 14x. Okay, so now we have eliminated the parentheses. Now let's combine any like terms. So if you look at the terms that we've got there, we've got an x squared term here and an x squared term here. So let's combine those together. We've got 21 of them and 14, so that gives us 35x squared. And we've got 14x plus 14x, so that's 28x. And now this is the simplified form of the original algebraic expression, 35x squared plus 28x. Now this one contained all positives, so let's do a little review of working with negatives so that we get so that we can handle them when there are negatives in them as well. Recall that multiplying a number by -1 makes that number negative. It changes the sign on that number. So for instance, if I had -1 times 3, that gives me -3. If I have -1 times -5, negative times a negative equals a +5, okay? And that's a perfect example for the next one here. When you're subtracting a negative, it actually changes the sign and gives you a positive value. Negative a times b gives you negative ab, and a times negative b also gives you negative ab. Here with these brackets, we're actually using the distributive property, and think of that negative in front of the brackets as think of it as -1 times a plus b. Okay, so that'd be -1 times a, which is negative a, and -1, and we think of it as distributing, so those are little arrows. So a -1 times b would be a negative b. So what that does is it changes the sign of the items or the terms that are in the parentheses. So the a is positive here, it's negative here. The b is positive here, it's negative here. Okay, so same thing with this next example. The negative out front changes the sign of everything that's in it, or think of it as multiplying it by -1. So we end up with negative a plus b because we're changing the sign, or thinking -1 times negative b gives me positive b. And you could also write that as b minus a. So quick review of how to handle negative values, and there's more work on that and a great chart of that on page 22 in your textbook. So let's take a look at the next example here. I've got -2 times 3x minus 4y plus 7. So think about the distributive property. It's actually okay to draw these arrows to remind yourself that you're multiplying that -2 by every term that's inside the parentheses. So we have -2 times 3x to get -6x, -2 times -4y to get +8y, and -2 times +7 to get -14. And we're finished. And then the next question, number 3, and again, for each of these questions,
The emergency broadcast system. This is just a test. Thank you.
in this next question, we've got two sets of brackets, or parentheses. We've got the square brackets around the 7 minus x minus 2, and the x minus 2 is in its own set of brackets. So we work as we work through this, we have to take care of that inner set of brackets first. So this will be 6 plus 4 times 7. And now think of that as a -1, okay? Think of it as -1 times x minus 2, and do the distributive property on that. So -1 times x will be a -x. -1 times -2 is a +2. Okay, so now in these brackets we can look for any like terms that we could combine, and you'll see that the 7 and the 2 are both constant terms, so they can be combined. So we've got 6 plus 4 times 9 minus x. And if you wrote that as -x plus 9, that would also be correct. So now we can multiply through this set of square brackets. So we're multiplying those terms by 4. Remember, this is multiplying between here, so it needs to be done before we add here. So I've got 6 plus, and I've got 4 times 9, which is 36, and 4 times negative x, so that's negative 4x. So now let's write that out in proper form. We always put our variables first, and if there's more than one variable, we put them in decreasing order of their exponents. So the negative 4x is going to come first, plus, and then 6 plus 36 is 42. And there's our final answer. We could write it as 42 minus 4x, but the standard is to write the x term first.